For those of you who have just joined, this is the webinar for the minority serving institutions, request for application from Laser Pulse. And we have a lot of ground to cover, so we are going to jump in right away. And thank you for those of you who have been waiting patiently online. We'll get started here shortly. I have put, if you can see my screen, I've put some webinar housekeeping information there. We are asking that you launch the chat beneath your screen. That's the main way that we'll be using to ask questions. And once you launch the chat, please select everyone in the drop-down menu so that you can be sure everyone is seeing the questions that you are posing in the chat box. We encourage that you consult the frequently asked questions document that we posted to make sure that the questions you are asking were not already answered, so we can save time for this webinar. Finally, we will have a recording of the webinar and a transcript of the Q&A that we will have today and what you all have already sent in. We will post that on the RFA website, and this will happen within a few days after this webinar. So please go ahead, type in the chat box your name and your institution affiliation, and we'll start here in a minute. I'm gonna stop sharing for a little bit so we can have a few minutes of introductions, mostly introducing the speakers for today, and then we will jump into the webinar. As I said, we have a lot of ground to cover and we have just 1 hour to do this. Okay, so let me start, and then the Laser Pulse colleagues can join in, and then we'll move from there. So my name's Peri Bugusu. I'm the Technical Director for Laser Pulse, and I'll be leading this webinar. Pallavi?
Hi, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, where you're joining from. My name is Pallavi Gupta, and I'm the Program Director of the Laser Pulse. Thank you. I can pass it on to Yuvan.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Yuvan Yi, Academic Director of Laser Pulse.
Pamela?
Hello, Pamela McClure, Research Project Manager, Laser Pulse.
Fred?
Good morning. My name is Fred Rossi. I'm the Monitoring and Evaluation Specialist for Laser Pulse, and I'm with the University of Notre Dame.
Msi?
Hello, I'm the Operations Manager for Laser Pulse.
Thank you, Msi. Susie?
Hello, I'm Susie Sear. I'm the Business Manager for Laser Pulse, working in finance and compliance.
Thanks, Susie. We'll have a few other laser staff that will be joining here shortly that will also presenting some information on this webinar. So you will get to meet them during the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'm gonna share my screen once more. As I said, this is the housekeeping for this webinar. Those who have just joined after those introductions, please be sure to locate the chat box underneath your screen and select everyone. Also enter the information about your name and your institution affiliation. And once you select everyone, if you have a question, please go ahead and type in the chat box. That will be the main form of communication on this webinar. And then we encourage you to look at the frequently asked questions documents before you ask a question, just in case the question you have is already answered. And finally, we'll have a recording of this webinar and the transcript for the Q&A a few days after this webinar. So we've just gone through the introductions. Some of the names you don't see here will be joining here shortly, and majority of them will be giving parts of this presentation. So this is the ground we are going to cover today. We'll give you some introductory remarks about laser pulse. Then we'll talk about our key concept, which is the embedded research translation model. And then we'll give you a little bit of background about this MSI RFA and also the key requirements. We'll go a little bit into details about the letter of intent that we are asking you to submit a few weeks from today on December 14th. And then we'll talk about, we'll give you an introduction of the systems level analysis approach. That's the laser pulse approach that we are proposing you use. It's not required, but it's one of the methods you can use since we are asking for systems level analysis. Finally, we'll respond to the questions we have received to date, and we'll also try to respond to the questions in the chat box. If we don't have answers for those immediate questions of today, we'll include in the document that will be posted online. If we have time, we'll cover a little bit about the full application. If not, you will have those slides for your reference so that you make sure that even as you are preparing your LOI, you are keeping in mind what are those key requirements for the full application. So I'll hand it over to Pallavi to talk about laser pulse.
Thank you, Betty.
Let me know when to advance the slides.
Sure, will do. Thank you, Betty. So welcome again, and thank you for joining in this early morning call. I know, I know it's cold and it can be difficult, but I won't take a whole lot of your time. I'll just introduce what this massive complex program is about, and you will hear sort of details, the portions of it a little later from my team. But just to give you an overview, as you probably have seen already from our website, the Laser Pulse is a 5-year, $70 million program. It's funded by USAID's ITR Hub, Innovation, Technology, and Research Hub. And we aspire to deliver research-driven solutions to field source development challenges in USAID partner countries. So basically what this means is that we work with USAID's missions, bureaus, and independent offices to understand the areas where research can actually bring impact. And for this purpose, we bring together myriad of stakeholders, experts like you all, researchers and practitioners, government entities, local administrations, and USAID themselves. And to do that so that you all can work together to co-design and create evidence-based solutions, practices, and policies that are relevant and applicable to the ground realities and challenges. And we do this work as a consortium led by Purdue University, where I sit, as well, and in partnership with CRS, Indiana University, McGregor University, and University of Notre Dame. I'll talk a little bit about what the mechanism of funding is, but we have two different streams of funding. One is RFA, which is where the MSI RFA sits. And the other one is buy-ins, and I'll talk about those two a little bit. But just to tell you, the funding sort of ceilings are 20 million and 50 million respectively. So in terms of sort of the scope of our work, we work with all the USAID partner countries and all USAID sectors, and you can see a glimpse of it at the bottom of the slide. We are, so basically what I'm saying is we are kind of sector and geography agnostic. And we also are open to various research methodologies that sort of are considered during our program sort of co-creation. Thank you. Can you advance to the next slide, please, Betty? All right. So in this slide, I really want to take a few minutes of your time to share with you what we consider unique about Laser Pulse. Now, there are 6 components that we think set us apart from other such programs. First one is network. We have a vast network of 2,600 researchers in 61 countries. Now, our network includes development professionals, sector experts, donors, industry collaborators, and research. And our members have expertise across multiple sectors like agriculture, education, health, democracy and governance, environment, water and sanitation, economic growth, gender and crisis and conflict. So in case you are looking for a partner, a good place for it would be, going onto our website, and you can actually choose the parameter you want to specifically look for, either geography or thematic areas. And you can see some of the partners who are already there, and you can sort of initiate a conversation through our website. And it's very user-friendly, and you may actually find it very helpful. And the other aspect of our work, which is core to our philosophy, is research. This is the identification of research needs. Now at LaserPulse, we have always believed that the development challenges are complex and interconnected, and there's rarely one solution or silver bullet to solve a development challenge. So right in the beginning of the program, we recognize the need for systems approach that could help in isolating the main gaps, these gaps that are preventing a successful development outcome. Now, we used innovation science and systems approach to create systems analysis and models to identify the missing factors where we could, if we could focus the research on, we can get the most impact and achieve our development objectives more efficiently, effectively, and sustainably. And this is part of the MSI package that we shared with you. We have an SLA, this framework that I was referring to, in place, and we have shared all that information in the document. But you're also as Betty would refer to later, you can also, if you're experienced in some other frameworks and approaches, we are open to that as well. Now, in terms of research funding, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, all our research is funded by two main mechanisms: core awards and buy-ins. Awards like this one are the mechanism to promote research-driven solutions for field source development challenges. Buy-ins are a mechanism where we work very closely with the USAID's mission bureaus and independent offices to understand their specific thematic or regional priorities, and then co-design the research accordingly. So the objective of both the tracks is the same. The way we do it is a little bit different between the two tracks. I will very briefly touch upon ERT because we have a team who will take you through it in more detailed fashion later. So ERT, the embedded research translation, is another core component of our work, which we have designed and perfected actually via multiple iterations across different, buy-ins and RFA projects. ERT is a model via which we bring together the various stakeholders to intentionally, systematically, and consciously apply the research to development challenges and co-designed right from the beginning of their work, as opposed to the afterthought and probably, as opposed to a later step in the project life cycle. It's right up from the start, and it continues to be embedded throughout the process, hence the name embedded research translation. Now, next one is gender integration. Is another core component of our work. We are very deliberate in gender mainstreaming in all our work and also in the work of our sub-awardees. So as we progress through the phase of the work, we have a team that provides that kind of support to the awardees. We also have created trainings and guidelines for gender mainstreaming, and it is on our website, and we'll take you through that in terms of requirements and stuff later as well. The last component we believe that sets us apart is capacity strengthening. So we conduct regular surveys of our network members to understand from them their needs and requirements. And we then engage our in-house expertise or borrow the expertise from our partners and their institutions to create and design trainings, tools, templates, to build in and embed this capacity both in our network members, but also in our awardees throughout the process. So there is a lot of this kind of material already on our website. In case you feel you have a need for something, you can, serve through our website, and you can pick and choose whatever seems applicable to your work and catches your fancy. On this slide, you can see this is a very high-level outlook of some of the projects that and regions that we work in. On top is the core awards, and on the bottom you'll see some of the selected buy-ins. I don't want to go too much deep into this. It's all on our website under the research tab. You can go there, you can select the region you want to see the project or thematic area you want to see the work we are doing, and it's all there. Next slide, please. Okay, so with that, I can hand it over back to you, Betty.
Great, thanks, Pallavi. So we will move you into the key component that Pallavi just described, the embedded research translation. So Chris, take it off.
Thank you, Betty. Thanks, Pallavi. My name is Christopher Rice. I am the Research Translation Communication Lead with Indiana University and Laser Pulse. So I'll walk you through very briefly just a short introduction to our embedded research translation model and approach here. So as Pallavi mentioned, our definition over here, the key words that we have for embedded research translation are really iterative, which can mean multiple cycles, multiple times doing things, going back and forth, co-design from the very beginning with multiple partners. It's a process, and it's among academics, practitioners, and other stakeholders. And really, it's for research to be intentionally applied to a development challenge. Now, we'll be going over systems level analysis later, and that'll get you to the research question area. Research translation is really more about the implementation side of things and making sure that research gets into the field in terms of informing or changing practice or policy. And the embedded component of it is about planning for uptake from the very beginning, not at a later stage. So we want to make sure that that research translation is built into the project from the absolutely very beginning. The more classical models of research translation you might be familiar with are more of a two-stage process where you conduct research and then you translate it into the field. Our approach is really more of a one-stage process where this is all integrated throughout. So you can see in the model here on the far right side, what we have is researchers in deep collaboration with a variety of partners over here. And so this can be non-governmental organizations, it can be government in the form of policymakers, it can be private sector partners, potentially donors as well. And what they work through together, and this is the iterative co-design process. This is working through the things on the bottom blue, they're identifying the research question, conducting the research, establishing context, and doing some field testing of what a solution might end up being. The types of outcomes that you get are up here on the upper left. You end up with discovery, really good learning, potentially innovation, and hopefully a field-tested solution to a development challenge. Now, this is primarily, this infinity loop over here is primarily where the majority of our research projects go, and we want to get them at this tail. This tail over here on the far right side is where you get really to the larger impacts of research translation, where you get increased awareness for what you're doing, you get opportunities to maybe replicate it or scale it elsewhere, chances to do wider application, and ultimately to impact. Now, importantly, I know these are 12-month projects that we're looking at, and so I think we'd be reasonable to say that I don't know if it's feasible to get all the way to the upper end of this tail, but we want to get at least to a plan to get to at least the beginning stages of this tail for the projects that we have. So next slide, Betty. Another way of thinking about this, if you don't like models and flow charts and things like that, just very descriptive pillars of what our approach is all about. So these are the four main things, and these four things are very important because we expect these to be outlined in your full application later on. These will be part of the strategy that you have to elaborate on, so you have to write a small section for each of these. And they're part of a broader impact criterion upon which your applications will be evaluated. And for additional detail on these, we have a mandatory introduction to research translation training that's currently available on our website. But these four pillars, these are partnership, so integrating partners early and throughout the project. Again, this is to make sure that solutions are more likely to be adopted and really applied into the field. And related to the RFA, this also necessitates the inclusion of a translation partner on your project. And so, again, this can be an NGO, a government entity, private sector party, entities like that. The next one is ensuring a solid foundation to work together effectively on the project. So this is your collaborative process for engaging together throughout. The next pillar that I think is the most tangible component of research translation is a translation product that can inform policy or practice. And we want this to be co-designed with all partners and looked at from the very beginning. But it's something that is tangible that you create. That's not a 200-page research report. It could be a 2-page research brief. It could be a training, a program, some kind of a manual or guidebook, business plan, some kind of a gadget or manufactured product, or even more communication type of things like multimedia content, infographics, or videos. We encourage our teams to make sure they include the costs for these in the budgets that they submit. And you'll be able to look a little bit more about what our projects are doing. I've included a link in here where you can read more about how our projects are developing these sort of products. Some of the examples that we have so far, they're a little bit atypical, but we welcome things that are atypical, that are unique and innovative. Things like a WebGIS system, a blockchain mobile application, a cookbook, interactive online evidence gap map, which is pretty interesting. You can read about community leader personas to inform USAID engagement officers. Some really interesting stuff in here that you can think about for product. And again, I think this is the most tangible part. What is also probably applicable for everybody is dissemination. And so this is, again, planning for that tail that I referenced earlier. So this is the wider application and scale up beyond just the partnership and really getting at that larger uptake in the field. Now, what might be different for researchers than what you're used to is that, we want dissemination to go to different places than just, like academic conferences or places where researchers gather together, but getting to more, either practitioner conferences or getting to events where maybe private sector partners might have things going on, meetings with government officials, those sorts of things to really get at the dissemination into the practice and policy area. So again, these categories are very important, and I hope at least one or two of these, either the pillars or the model is applicable to you and helps you to understand what we're all about. Again, these are required in the narrative section for research translation and the application. They feed into the evaluation criteria. So learn more about these, look into them, think about what you can do or what your experiences might be in the past on all of these. And as you're doing so, I'll paste another link in the chat here as I close. This is the link to our learning resources. You can go in and find tools, templates, narrative guidance on how to do these sorts of things and develop products or plan for dissemination. And you can check out trainings on topics that are related to research translation that are generally about 20 to 30 minutes that can help you to work through these sorts of things. So thank you for listening, and happy to take questions toward the end of the presentation. Back over to you, Betty.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So following Chris, I'll walk you through the background information for this RFA. And just to give you a high level, most of the information is already available in the RFA, but this is just a summary of what are those key requirements that Laser Pulse is looking for. So the RFA calls for innovative research and associated research translation tied to a USAID country priority. And I'll talk a little bit more about this USAID country priority. We have also highlighted the key sectors of focus. And as Pallavi mentioned in the beginning, we work in all sectors and in all USAID partner countries. But so we have some few limitations that I'm going to highlight here. So these are all the sectors that USAID works in. The last sector there says global health. Global health is one of the sectors that we have limitations on what activities we can work on. Generally, we don't work on conventional global health topics like HIV, AIDS, and maternal and child care health. Mostly we work on areas that are borderline to public health. And so what we are asking here is that should you be interested in working in this sector of global health, please email us your topic or your proposed research area, and we'll be able to check with USAID and determine if that proposed topic falls within the scope of this RFA. This is the list of countries that are eligible for this RFA. We have listed all the countries possible. If the country is not showed on this list, please make sure, just know that you cannot work in that country because there are other limitations which are also highlighted in the RFA. For example, notification countries, we are not allowed to work in those countries. So this is the exhaustive list of areas, regions and countries where you can work. So make sure your proposed research is targeting any of these countries listed here. Just to give you a high-level overview of the MSI timeline. So this RFA was released on November the 10th. We are asking you send a letter of interest, and the submission is December 14th, 2021. And by midnight, we want to let you know that the LOI will not be evaluated for merit. All we want is to just get an understanding of what sectors and what topics will you be covering in your application should you be selected to submit a full application. So I'll give you a little bit more details about the LOI and what those requirements are, but just so you know, it's due on December 14th. The full application will be due in February. That's February 14th, 2022, next year. And that will be again at around midnight. We are expecting to award 5 applications for a total of 150,000 each for 1 month duration. The expected notification award will be in the fall of 2022. Now I want to go deeper into the key requirements for the letter of intent. First is the eligibility requirement. As you all know who are on this call, that this requires that the application be led by a minority serving institution based here in the United States. So if you are not a minority serving institution and you are interested, it will be important to reach out to a minority serving institution so that you can partner with them. The other major requirement here is that you must partner with a development practitioner. As Chris alluded to in the beginning, this is the part where we are talking about embedded research translation. And so you must have a development practitioner or who we are calling a translation partner. And that can be an NGO. And if you're working with an NGO, it must have a presence in the host country of your proposed activity. It can also be a local government agency, and it can also be a private sector entity. The proposed research must be derived from a USAID country priority, and this is what I wanted to give a little bit more information on. So you will be required to dig a little bit into what is the priority for the mission or for the country that you want to focus on. And this, we have 2 ways to determine what the USAID country priority is. The first way is to look at the country development cooperation strategy. It's called CDCS. Some countries have a CDCS, other countries don't have. Or if they have, those who have, sometimes it has expired. So it has to be the most current CDCS. In this case, if the country doesn't have a CDCS, we ask that you check for the regional development cooperation strategy. If you don't have a regional cooperation strategy, we ask that you look at the mission website and determine what are their key priority areas. So a good example here is the mission of Brazil. So Brazil is a small USAID mission. They don't have a CDCS, but they have specific priorities that they are looking for research to help address. And one of them is environment. So if you are not able to find the CDCS for the country that you want to work in or the regional development cooperation strategy, please consult the USAID country mission website. We have done the legwork for you a little bit. We have linked all the CDCSs that are available for all the countries that we have listed. If there is no CDCS linked to the country where you want to work, that means it's not available, and therefore you should go straight ahead and consult the mission website. Again, the applications must be written in English. And another requirement, as Christopher Rice alluded to, is the trainings. So we have 2 specific trainings, and this is part of also our laser pulse capacity building. The first one is gender analysis in research and application. The second one is introduction to embedded research translation. Both of them are hyperlinked in this presentation. However, you must be registered in the Laser Pulse network to be able to access these courses. So I guess moving on from here, if you are interested in applying to this RFA, the first order of business is to register in the Laser Pulse network. And all the information is available on our website. There is also an optional training that we are asking, if you have time, you can look at it. It's about preparing a successful Laser Pulse application. So this might be helpful for you if you have never applied for Laser Pulse before, but this can guide you on the key requirements that we have partly outlined here, but the training goes into deeper details. Now for the LOI, we have provided a template. For the most part, the LOI will be submitted through Qualtrics. And in the Qualtrics, we've provided the link both in the RFA and also it's hyperlinked in this presentation. I have just provided the list of the requirements for the LOI template. We are asking that it just be 3 pages maximum. And out of that, the things listed here, title of research, lead, principal investigator, co-investigator, USAID technical sector, country of priority, and so on and so forth are the things that will go into that template. The things that have an asterisk in red means those are required fields. So you must cover those. And also the fact that if these ones cannot change, they have to stay. If you submit the LOI and you are selected to submit the full application, those with asterisk cannot change. Anything that doesn't have an asterisk can change. And all this information is also available in the RFA itself. So with that, we have been talking about the systems level framework. That is one of the requirements. So Laser Pulse have their own systems level requirement approach, systems level approach that has been developed. However, this is not a requirement for you to use the Laser Pulse systems level analysis. As Pallavi alluded to previously, you can use any other approach that you are familiar with. So let me hand it over to Frederick Rossi, who is going to walk you through the systems level analysis approach for Laser Pulse. Fred?
Thank you, Betty. So I want to start out, next slide, by providing acknowledgement of where this methodological approach comes from. And so this part of the webinar presents the system level analysis approach, or SLA, and some elements of the larger comprehensive success factor analysis process from which SLA is derived. And these are both developed by Professor Joe Sinfield and his team here at Purdue University. And the systems level approach is an adaptation derived from a much more extensive process, just referenced here as the comprehensive success factor analysis. As such, this SLA process, as a simplified system level framework, is a derivation that allows us to examine existing challenges in order to define further a problem, identify research questions, and think about potential solutions. SLA utilizes some of the core components of the CSFA process, and its overall goal is to get research teams to think more broadly about what it takes for their work to achieve its greatest impact. Now, the CSFA process is a much more involved and deeper dive that Laser has used in the past, but it takes weeks and weeks of data collection and analysis to distill out the research questions. The SLA process was developed specifically for research teams to work, in a much shorter time frame to help them identify research questions for potential research projects. And so in this slide, we show a couple of references to Joe Sinfield's work. One is a video that he's produced about system level view of development challenges, and this presentation is partly based on that. There are some differences, so that's why we're doing this webinar specifically. And then there's also a publication in Sustainable Futures, a journal that goes into much more deeper detail on the more comprehensive aspect, the CSF. Okay, next slide, please. So the purpose of this overview is to provide RFA applicants with an introduction to system level analysis so they can complete the required system level components using this particular approach. Now, as mentioned before by Betty, we are not requiring that this specific approach be used. You can select from another system type analysis framework. But if you choose to use this, then this is why we're providing information on it. And so the guiding question for this portion of the webinar is, how can teams utilize the SLA process to identify research questions to define their project? All right, next slide, please. So Betty covered some of the RFA requirements, but I'm specifically going to talk about those that touch on this area here. And so these bullets are from the RFA. And the key takeaway here is that you will need to use some type of system level analytical framework for identifying 2 to 4 opportunities for research that are tied to the country priority needs as outlined by USAID. She covered that. This is bullet 2 here in this slide. From these identified opportunities, you will then choose one that will be the focal point of your research proposal. That's bullet 3 here. While you have several methodological options to select from, Laser encourages you to use SLA, and that's why we're going over this again. But regardless of the method that you use, you must demonstrate your work. And this is bullet 4 here. And so there will be templates if you use SLA that will be completed as part of the process that you will submit. Or if you use some other method, you'll have to show what you did there, whether it's a flow chart or a stakeholder analysis or whatever. Okay, next slide. So we'll now briefly cover systems level thinking and describe what success factors are, which is kind of the foundational aspect of this method. Next slide. So why system level thinking? Many development problems have persisted through time because their inherent complexity reflect interrelated contextual factors all across different geographies and socioeconomic influences. It's very rare today that development challenges can be tackled with simple, straightforward solutions, and therefore complex problems need to be examined considering the wider system within which they reside. And so work leading up to SLA has uncovered 15 general categories of success factors that are common across all development sectors. And this is where we'll begin. Next slide. So think about a puzzle. You have an idea of what it is supposed to look like, and your job is to find the missing pieces to complete it. A comprehensive list of all factors that need to be in place to achieve desired outcomes would describe an ideal system state in which all required elements are functioning. That would be the full picture of the puzzle. But in this case, we use the 15 categories of broad success factors to help us identify the key missing pieces of the puzzle. And so research gap identification requires that we examine the differences between the desired ideal state of the system being studied and the current state of the system. Next slide, please. So here are the 15 categories of success factors. they're grouped. There's 4 groups kind of color coded here. So you've got the yellow and green areas, kind of infrastructure and capital, and then you have the blue, which is awareness and motivation, enabling strategies, and then you have the purple, which is kind of measurement, sustainability, resilience. Then you have the orange, which is kind of security, policy, government, and leadership. So those are kind of the broad areas. There's 4 broad groupings of these 15 categories, right? So an examination of the success factors and their relevance to the problem will help us to identify the gaps for further areas of research. Specifically, we are looking at whether these factors have not been addressed or need more attention. And we have a template to help guide us through the process of selecting those. Again, it is crucial to understand that we are looking for success factors that are missing from the system that is being examined. Okay, next slide. So this is a success factor tree. So each of the 15 categories will have 1 or more subcategories or branches that describe the various success factors in more detail. So you can think of the 15 broad categories as the roots of the tree, and it serves as a lens through which we examine a given problem. They serve as a guide to structure the consideration of the problem, and they help identify the missing success factors, as I mentioned. So thus, a fully formed success factor tree represents a complete list of success factors that could be required for the system to function. Note that some success factors will already be present in the context of a specific problem and thus operate at desired levels of effectiveness. Others, in contrast, are required but not adequately addressed and may not have adequate evidence to determine the best solutions to the complex development problem being examined. And so these are the factors that are likely to merit attention and must be identified. Next slide. So this goes into a little bit more detail. So this can be, the detail is found in the branches of the tree. So here we're looking specifically at the infrastructure category of one of the 15 broad categories, and we look at infrastructure in more detail. So there's some subcategories here like physical infrastructure, resources for infrastructure construction, maintenance of infrastructure, etc. Each success factor category will have branches similar to this where the detail is found. And using the success factor tree, which will be provided to you, you can see a breakdown of each category to better understand all of what it includes. Next slide. So as a researcher or a development practitioner, you can assess each factor and think about how it may or may not connect to your work. And for that purpose, we have a checklist, and that's how these broad categories can be used. Even if a given success factor does not directly relate to your research or project in the broader system, it may be critical that it is addressed to enable your work to have optimal impact, and therefore consideration of ways that you can influence that factor may be important. And so this isn't the actual checklist. This is just kind of an abstract representation of it. And further along in this presentation, we'll actually go through how to use the checklist. And the next slide kind of shows how this actually works, right? So this slide, kind of scroll through some more, Betty. Yeah, keep going there until you get to 4. Okay. So the checklist that we observe in the preceding slide optimizes the process of selecting success factor categories relevant to your work by answering a series of questions, right? So there's 4 questions here that must be considered. First, we ask if a given success factor category is required for our work to have impact. If the answer is no, we should just move on to the next category. So if we're looking at infrastructure and infrastructure isn't important, then we just go to the next category. But if the answer is yes, however, we then ask if the factor category is adequately addressed in the existing problem. If the answer here is yes, we can move on to the next category. But if the answer is no, then we objectively assess the evidence available to address that specific factor category, in this case, the first one being infrastructure. If we believe that we know all that we can and answer yes to this question, then we move to the next category because it's pretty much already covered. But if the answer is no, then we do not feel that we know enough or what is needed, then we ask what we can do to contribute evidence via research to inform how to make this category a reality. So this is, in a nutshell, the process. And what you get to the next slide when applying this is you'll identify, click again, Betty, you'll identify one more time. You'll get to a subset of the 15 broad categories where your attention will need to be focused, right? So once you've answered the series of questions in the previous slide for all of the 15 categories, you'll have a list of relevant categories for success factors deemed to be required, but may not yet have enough evidence to adequately address a problem under consideration. In addition to the demonstrated gap identified through the SLA process, research questions should be specific, have strategic value, and leverage your strengths and partnerships, have value for stakeholders, and be feasible to answer. The process we show here should help narrow potential questions, but some additional considerations will help with final selection as well. So again, what we're seeing here is kind of abstract of what you'll end up with at the end of the process. But the actual template is different, and we'll go through that shortly. Okay, so next slide here. So what preceded was a brief overview of success factors and how they are used to facilitate a comprehensive examination of a system to identify critical gaps that can be addressed through research. We'll now look at how to apply the system level analysis process in more detail with a specific example. Next slide. So SLA in practice, how is it done? There's basically 4 steps that guide us through the research question identification process. And it's facilitated with a activity worksheet that has 3 activities that, as you work through, you'll get to the end process that I described previously. So should you choose to use SLA as part of the MSI RFA, this is a process that you will apply. You will begin by identifying your problem. Then you will use the 15 success factor categories and associated checklist to identify the critical areas of focus. Then you identify gaps in knowledge that need to be addressed. Identification of required and unaddressed categories can enhance the potential for your work to achieve its desired outcome, and this will be reflected in research questions generated. Note at the bottom of this slide, there are 2 banners that will be shown on most of the following slides to indicate either the general principle or the actual activity example that we're using. All right, next slide. So the first step is to identify the problem you want to examine using SLA. So what is USAID country priority are you addressing? Given this priority area, what problem or challenge are you examining through the SLA process? And who is the target population that will benefit from this, from solving this problem, right? So again, the activity 1 worksheet will walk you through this first step. And the problem you identify is the foundation of the SLA research identification process that you move forward with. Okay, next slide. So here's the example. Our example is we've identified the priority area as early grade reading in South Sudan. That's kind of the broad priority. The problem specifically is rural schools do not have access to age appropriate reading materials. And the target populations obviously will be early grade students, but also the teachers that teach them and rural schools where that all takes place. So note that this problem is specific, clear, and narrow. And so that's kind of, important to get at. So this is kind of the context that we're going to run through the process going forward. Okay, next slide. So activity 2 is identifying missing success factor categories. This is where we are fulfilling that second RFA requirement, the identification of gaps using a system level view that allows us to generate new research questions for the generation of essential evidence. This step aids us in thinking about what needs to come next within the categories that we are identified as relevant. So again, we're identifying the gaps and determining the needs. Next step, or next slide. So this graphic shows what the template actually looks like, the checklist template actually looked like, and this is part of activity 2. So activity 1 is a worksheet that helps you define your problem. Activity 2 is this checklist. So building from activity 1, this activity will help you identify the missing success factor categories that you may want to consider to address with new research questions. This system level view can lead to new understandings that increase the chances the project will see real and sustainable impact. Again, the 15 categories that form the basis for developing a system level view or problem can be used as a checklist for impact. And the next few slides will guide you step by step through the process to fill out the activity 2 template. So yeah, we can go to the next slide now. So yeah, click through all this. So recall this slide from earlier. We'll go through this process step by step in the activity to identify the missing success factor categories. All right, next slide. Also recall this slide from earlier. We will use the infrastructure category and its branches as the basis of the examples that follow. When you do this for your development problem, you will use the success factor tree, which will be provided to delve into each category for the detail you need specific to your work. Okay, so for each of the success factor categories in the activity 2 template, ask yourself, is this category required for your work to have impact? For our problem here, schools do not have access to age-appropriate reading materials. We understand that infrastructure is indeed required because reading materials need to be delivered to the schools, which requires road infrastructure, methods of delivery, and transport of the appropriate materials. So schools need to be able to store, access, and use materials. Books need to be printed. So these are just a few of the quick examples. So if these are missing, then access will be restricted. Access to the reading materials will be restricted. And so then we select yes. Note that if infrastructure is not required for the specific problem you work on, then you would simply go to the equipment and supplies category and re-ask the question. But in this case, we've chosen yes, it's important for our project. So we go to the next category, which is the next slide. So in the present case of our example, however, the answer is yes. So we move on to the next question, still within the infrastructure category. This exercise may require some knowledge of your ecosystem and or awareness of actors and actions being taken towards your intended goal. And you may not know this immediately. If this is the case, you try to perform a web search or literature review to develop an informed perspective. You may need to consult knowledgeable members of your project team. For this example, however, we will answer no. If the answer happened to be yes, then you would go no further in infrastructure and proceed to the equipment and supplies category to ask the first question again. Is this category required for your work to have impact, right? But no, but here we don't have the information, so it's not being adequately addressed. So we say no, and we go to the next column. So in column 3 of the checklist, we ask ourselves, do you have sufficient evidence to address this category? If the answer is yes, we move on to equipment and supplies. We go no further. But again, this might require also ecosystem knowledge, and you might find this evidence in further study of the category. This is the final relevance question. If the answer is no, then there is missing success factor that needs to be addressed in your problem for your problem to eventually be solved. And you have identified a knowledge gap in your problem space. So we're assuming that, and so we say no, and we go to the next category, the final column here of the checklist template. And this is what needs to be learned to fulfill the requirements of the category. So we've got here by selecting no in column 3. And so we'll now fill out column 4 with what we need to get out of the infrastructure category to help us define and solve our problem. Once this is completed, then you start over with question 1 with the next success factor category, equipment and supplies. All right, so let's go to the next slide, which is an example of filling out column 4 here. So in our example for infrastructure for the rural school early grade reading materials, we've identified that what is the road infrastructure like at select sample of rural schools? What is the primary method of transport of school materials? Do they have access to library infrastructure? So we need to know, we need to answer these questions in order to solve the problem, right? And so this is how the process goes. All right, next slide. So activity 3 is is where we formulate a plan of action by generating research questions to address the knowledge gaps that are identified in activity 2. So what we've just been through. All right, so next slide. So here we have the research question must be focused on gaps that impact your identified problem. And activity 3 has its own sheet in the template, and so you start by writing your problem out at the top of the sheet, so that you always have that in mind as you start to answer the questions for each of the success factor categories that you've identified that need more specific focus on, right? Okay, and so there's 3 main questions that we're trying to answer at this point. Okay, next slide. So we know our problem is rural schools do not have access to age-appropriate reading materials. So based on a description recorded in the final column of activity 2, you may not be able to identify some, you may be able to identify some immediate actions that you can undertake to build on your expertise and experience to address these gaps. And so that's kind of what you would do here in column 1. So in other words, you could study existing literature. No, you can go to the next slide, that's fine. You could study existing literature or research on rural infrastructure. You could generate list of stakeholders, may have more information on infrastructure needs for rural areas. And you could study existing literature on educational infrastructure in the country and region, right? The next column here is that what research questions could be studied to better address the knowledge gap in the success factor. So we now want to ask, these pertinent research questions, and answering these research questions should help solve the identified problem and support the achievement of the larger project outcomes. Note that these research questions may not be directly linked to your area of experience or expertise. Instead, they may require input of other fields or other stakeholders in the system. But if pursued, the results of related research should support the development of the missing success factors and thus further your ability to achieve impact. So you're identifying the research questions that are relevant. Not all of them you'll be able to answer, but you want to get a list of all the specific questions that need to be answered, because you may be able to work on some of them, but in order for the grand problem to be kind of solved and realized, other researchers may have to take up some of these other research questions, right? That's the system level view. Okay, so let's say that we've done some literature review and stakeholder interviews and other outreach necessary, and we're able to validate some of the gaps and opportunities, we can then refine our areas for learning to generate new research questions that address the newly identified opportunities. We have generated new research questions through the identification of gaps in the system, and have templates and frameworks of systems level thought as evidence of our process. The only missing part now is potential partners, which is the next step in the process. But since it is fairly self-evident to identify missing potential partners, we will skip that part in this presentation. And this will then conclude our SLA overview here. But just to sum up here, this slide then shows in red text some of the research questions that were generated by this specific question of age-appropriate reading materials in rural schools in South Sudan.
Okay, thank you, Fred, for that detailed presentation on the SLA approach. And hopefully, the participants have, I'm sure they have some questions for you. But let's just quickly address, and I would like to apologize, we are running just a few minutes late, but I would like to address a couple of questions that we have received to date to see if they resonate with you all. So the first question we received is that, how do I figure out what activities are allowed and not allowed under global health? So I had already explained a little bit of that. I mentioned that the conventional areas in global health, like maternal and child care health and HIV/AIDS, are not, eligible for this RFA. But there are a few exceptions, especially in the area of public health sector. And so we are asking again that you send an email to awards manager at Laser Pulse, and so we can check and see if that topic is eligible for this RFA. Then somebody provided a specific example. They wanted a potential applicant say, traditionally, the researchers and practitioners have looked at the two sectors separately, that's nutrition and health effects due to cooking, smoking, children, and women. So they were asking, they would like to integrate those two areas and look at it holistically. Will this fit in the RFA considering global health constraints? So our answer to this particular applicant was that from our own point of view, that's Laser Pulse, we think that this topic is fine. However, we have to cross-check with USAID before we can give a definitive answer. And we are in the process of doing that. The other question was around eligibility. One of the HEI, higher education institutions in Vietnam, is seeking to partner with an MSI institution. So we did provide the list of MSI institutions that we have on hand. And so for those of you who are on this call, if you are from an MSI institution, there are chances that another HEI partner from the country may be reaching out to you to see if you can partner. However, the lead, as we have said, must be from an MSI institution. And we don't require for all MSI institutions, the only requirement we have for you is to have a development practitioner who we are calling a translation partner. You don't have to have an HEI institution or a higher education institution in that country. However, if you choose to have that, it's allowed, but it's optional. The last question was, will this webinar be recorded? And the answer is yes, and we have already explained that.
Betty, we have one question in the chat.
Yep.
The duration of the project is 12 months. What's the possibility of an extension, especially in current COVID situations?
Okay. Pallavi, are you still on the call?
Yes, I can take that. So as of now, we don't have clarity on whether it can be extended. But there is a potential for that, but we'll have to confirm with the USA. While while you're writing the application, I'd request you to please consider the 12 months duration that has been outlined in the application requirements. Thank you.
Great. Any other question in the chat box? Okay, so this information, I'm not gonna go through it, but I want to just inform you.
Betty,
Yes, go
sorry,
ahead.
there is one more. Can we have multiple partners like NGOs, public institutions?
Yes, you can have multiple partners as we have indicated. However, our requirement is just to have one partner, one development practitioner, a partner. So if you choose to have an NGO and a government institution, that's still fine. The caveat to that is that you have to consider the budget that you have. So at this point, as I mentioned, we are only looking to award each award is going to be about $150,000 US. So if you choose more partners, it means they are likely to eat into your budget, and that may cause some problems for you. However, if you are able to fit as many partners as you want within the given budget, then that will be your decision.
And Betty, then can you also let them know how they will obtain the recording of the presentation?
Yes, the recording of the presentation will be on the RFA website. And Pamela, you can put the link in the chat box of where that recording is going to be housed. And once we have that, we will send a message to the network. So please try to register in the network, or whichever way you got this email, please try to follow that way, and we shall have it uploaded to the website within a few days.
And then there was another question. Can the leading institution have different projects with different countries? In this case, will there be one or more PIs?
The answer to that is no. We are expecting only, first of all, let's consider the issue of the budget. We only have $150,000 per application. So if you are looking to work in several countries, you must be thinking how you're going to divide that budget amongst the various partners. However, if you are able to do that, we'll welcome that. We just want to make sure that you are within the constraints of the budget, and also that you are not stretching yourself too much, so that you are not really able to reach to the stage, as close to the stage, the translation aspects of this process, as Christopher Rice alluded to. And we'll also review these questions keenly, because I'm just answering them off of the cuff right now, but we will review them and be able to provide comprehensive answers as part of a supplement to this webinar recording.
And then another question came in. 2 mandatory trainings mentioned for PIs and co-PIs need to be taken while writing LOI and full application, or after the announcement of award?
It has to be taken before writing the LOI, because that's how you will get to understand, how do I work with a translation partner? And how do I do the gender mainstreaming of? So it really helps if you have this basic information right from the beginning, so that you can understand exactly what is needed. And for this case, we are asking just the PIs and the co-PIs to take that training. The main co-PI in this case will be the translation partner. All the other ones are encouraged to take, but if the PI and co-PI have the knowledge, they should be able to share with the others as they develop the LOI and ultimately the full application if they are selected.
And do they need to register for the training?
Once you are a registered member of the Laser Pulse network, you should be able to access the mandatory trainings. And once you have completed, you'll receive a certificate. And the certificate generally comes through your email, the email you have used to register. If you are not able to access that certificate, you may first be able to look through your spam mail. If not, there is a way also you can download the certificate on the website. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Betty, I don't think so. I think you've covered it.
Betty, I just want to add that I put in the chat that the SuccessFactors trees and the activity template will also be made available on the MSI RFA page of the Laser Pulse website.
Great, thank you very much, Fred. So going back to our presentation, the next couple of slides that are highlighted there are really about the full application. We wanted you to get a flavor of how is the full application going to look like, and what is the evaluation criteria for the full application. So this will help you even as you develop your LOI to be as comprehensive as possible, understanding if I'm selected to move on to the full application, what is it gonna take to have a successful full application? So please take a moment to look through those slides, and mostly it's the information that is actually in the RFA. But if you have any questions, again, we are still open for the Q&A period, and we will still be accepting the questions until the next webinar, which is December 2nd, 2021.
And Betty, there's another question. Does Laser Pulse have resources in other languages, such as French, to help partners review resources or watch webinars?
Chris, do you have an answer to that? I think there's a way to translate. Go ahead.
Betty, I'm not sure. It's been a while. I know we have closed captioning available on the trainings. You can view, and so those will be in English if you have difficulty understanding voices such as mine, like this. I think we have English language closed captions that should be able to help you out. I'm not sure that we ever went through the formal translation process though for any of the materials that we have.
Okay, in the past, thanks, Chris. In the past, we've had some also subtitles in other languages. I think mostly it's been Spanish. I don't think we've had anything beyond that, but we will check on that and we'll respond appropriately in the subsequent Q&A script.
And the last question, would previous trainings be valid or should they be retaken?
So if you have taken the training before, all we need is the certificate to prove that you have taken that training, because we haven't changed the materials. And Chris and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the trainings have been here since the inception of Laser. Not much has changed. If you have taken it before, you should be fine. We'll just need to see the certificate, your certificate of showing that you took the test. I mean, you took the training.
And one more question came on. I understand proposal LOI has to have a link to an ongoing USAID activity, right?
So it's not a USAID ongoing activity. It has to be linked to a USAID priority, country priority. And as I mentioned previously, the country priority will come from the CDCSS or the USAID website, country website. So these ongoing activities could be a carryover from something else, but currently we are asking you to look at what is USAID wanting to do? What are some of the challenges the missions are facing? And how can you help through research to address those challenges? And those challenges are usually highlighted in the CDCS and or the USAID website if the CDCS is not available.
So Betty, let me just speak to that question a little bit. So that question may have come because they watched the previous video that's currently on the MSI RFA page of the Laser Pulse website, and that one was covering SLA for our previous RFA, in which we were asking to link to an existing USAID project. And so this RFA is a little different in that we're not asking to link to a specific project, but actually to be a little bit broader. I mean, it has to be linked to a priority area for research and interventions that USAID has in a country, but not any specific activity that's ongoing at the time. So I just wanted to clarify that, because that refers to our previous RFA.
Thank you very much, Fred, for that clarification, and we apologize to you all for that. So keep in mind when you are developing that to look at the USAID priority and not any activity, because you won't have any list of activities for USAID projects in those countries.
Yeah, so that SLA video that's currently on, I mean, it covers, you know, the same procedures, although it is a little bit different because of that different focus of the other RFA. So now that we've done this webinar, it will replace the existing one that's currently on there. So hopefully it will, you know, avoid any, you know, further confusion going forward.
And if you still have any questions on the SLA, please feel free to shield them to us. Again, we will hold another webinar on December 2nd to address, specifically to address the questions you've had, either from the information you've received here and or from having read thoroughly through the RFA and seeing things that are not clear to you. All right, so I think we have already taken about 17 minutes of your time, and we are sincerely thankful for your patience through this process. Again, we'll be meeting with you on December 2nd for the second webinar. Please feel free to send more questions our way so that on the next webinar we can focus mostly on addressing the key questions that you have and helping you to develop a successful LOI. And with that, we'll conclude the recording and end the webinar, and wish you well as you look to try and apply for this RFA. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to receiving more questions and ultimately LOIs for this RFA.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.